Amora had always believed that small mistakes didn't matter much. A wrong turn, a missed call, a text sent to the wrong number. She was wrong. It was a Thursday night in September, and the rain came down like it had nowhere else to go. She sat in her apartment, if you could call it that, with the wall so thin she could hear her neighbor's television through the plaster. The bills were spread across the kitchen table like evidence of a crime she'd committed against herself. Rent, utilities, her daughter's medication. The numbers didn't add up. They never did. Her daughter, Zara, slept in the next room. 6 years old. Too young to understand why they ate rice 3 nights in a row, why her mother's hand shook when the mailman came, why they hadn't visited the park in weeks. Amora stared at her phone. She'd been texting her landlord for days, begging for an extension. 2 weeks. Just 2 weeks. But he hadn't replied. So she tried again. Her fingers moved quickly, typing through the blur of exhaustion. Asterisk, please. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just time. I'll have it by the 15th. I promise. Asterisk. She hit send. And then she noticed. The number was off by 1 digit. Her stomach dropped. She stayed at the screen, watching the message sit there, delivered, irreversible. She thought about texting again to apologize, to explain. But to whom? A stranger. Someone who would delete it and move on. So she put the phone down and told herself it didn't matter. But an hour later, everything started to shatter. The first sign was the cars. Black. Sleek. 3 of them, pulling up outside her building with the kind of silence that made the air feel heavy. She heard the engines cut. Heard the doors open and close with precision. Heard footsteps. Too many footsteps. Coming up the stairs. Then the knocking. Not polite. Not patient. Heavy. Demanding. Amora stood frozen in the middle of her kitchen, her heart a wild thing trying to escape her chest. She thought about Zara. She thought about running. But there was nowhere to go. The knocking stopped. And then a voice came through the door, low and steady, like it had all the time in the world. Open the door, Amora. He knew her name. Her breath caught. She hadn't given her name in the text. She hadn't given anything. But he knew. She moved to the door on legs that barely held her. Her hand shook as she turned the lock. The door swung open, and the world she knew ended right there. There were 4 men in the hallway. Tall. Still. Dressed in black like shadows learning to stand upright. But it was the man in front who made her forget how to breathe. He wasn't the tallest. Wasn't the loudest. But when he stepped forward, the others moved aside like water parting for stone. He looked at her with eyes that had seen too much and felt too little. Dark hair. Sharp jaw. A scar that traced the edge of his cheekbone like a signature left by something violent. His name was Dante Caruso. And the moment he said her name again, softly, almost gently, she knew her life had just become someone else's. Before we go on, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. Amora, he said. You texted me. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. Her mind scrambled for an explanation, an apology, anything. But he raised a hand, and the words died in her throat. I don't get messages like that, he continued, stepping into her apartment without asking. The others followed. They moved through her space like they owned it, checking the windows, the bedroom door, the corners where shadows gathered. I don't, she started. I didn't mean to. It was a mistake. A mistake, he repeated, and something almost like amusement touched his face. Almost. You asked me for time. You promised you'd have it by the 15th. I thought you were my landlord. I'm not. I know that now. He looked around the apartment, at the bills on the table, at the tiny shoes by the door, at the life she'd been barely holding together with both hands. You have a daughter, he said. It wasn't a question. Amora's blood turned to ice. Please, she has nothing to do with this. I know. Then why are you here? Dante turned back to her, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes that wasn't cold. It was curiosity. maybe even concern. Because someone who texts me by mistake and begs for mercy, he said quietly, is either very brave or very desperate. And I don't like desperate people being left alone in the dark. She didn't understand, didn't want to, but before she could speak, one of his men stepped forward and whispered something in his ear. Dante's expression didn't change, but the air around him did. It sharpened. He looked at her again. "Pack a bag," he said. "What?" "Pack a bag. You and your daughter. You're coming with me." "I'm not going anywhere with you." His gaze didn't waver. "You texted the wrong number, Amora, and now the right people know where you are. If I found you this fast, so can they." "Who?" But he didn't answer. He just nodded to one of his men, who moved toward Zara's room. "Don't touch her." Amora stepped forward, panic flooding her veins. Dante caught her arm, not rough, but firm. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here because you're not safe. I don't even know you." "You will." And something in the way he said it, low, certain, like a promise carved into stone, made her believe him. 10 minutes later, she was in the back of one of those black cars, Zara asleep against her shoulder, the city lights blurring past the window like memories she was leaving behind. Dante sat across from her, silent and still, his eyes on the road ahead. She didn't know where they were going, didn't know what he wanted, didn't know if she'd made the worst mistake of her life or if, somehow, this was the thing that would save her. But as the rain drummed against the roof and the world outside became unfamiliar, she realized something that made her chest tighten. She wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of how much she wanted to believe he could protect her, and that, she thought, might be the most dangerous thing of all. The house was not what she expected. Amora had imagined something cold, industrial, a place built for men who lived in shadows and spoke in codes. But when the car pulled through the iron gates and climbed the winding driveway, what appeared before her was something else entirely. A mansion, old stone and tall windows, surrounded by trees that swayed like sentries in the wind. Lights glowed softly from within, warm and almost welcoming. It looked like a place where people lived, not where they hid. But appearances, she was learning, meant nothing. Dante opened the car door himself. No words, just a gesture, his hand extended toward her. She hesitated, then took it. His grip was steady, and for a moment, she hated how safe it made her feel. Zara stirred against her, blinking awake with sleepy confusion. "Mama." "It's okay, baby," Amara whispered, though she didn't know if it was. Inside, the house was even grander. High ceilings, polished floors, furniture that looked expensive and untouched. But it didn't feel like a home. It felt like a museum, beautiful and empty. A woman appeared from one of the side rooms, older, gray-haired, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense expression. She looked at Dante, then at Amara and Zara, and something softened in her face. "This is Lucia," Dante said. "She'll take care of you." Lucia stepped forward, her voice gentle. "Come, little one, let's get you something to eat." Zara looked up at Amora, uncertain. Amora nodded, even though every instinct told her to hold on tighter. Lucia took Zara's hand and led her away, and the silence that followed felt heavier than it should have. Amora turned to Dante. "Why am I here?" "Because you're not safe where you were." "You keep saying that, but you won't tell me why." He studied her for a long moment, and she saw something flicker in his eyes, a decision being made. "You texted me by mistake," he said slowly. "But the number you were trying to reach? It belongs to a man named Victor Harlan. He's not a landlord. He's a loan shark, and not the kind who just breaks kneecaps and walks away." Her stomach twisted. "I've never heard of him." "Maybe not, but someone you know has. And when you sent that message to me, it flagged in my system. My people traced it, found you, and by now, so has he." She felt the ground tilt beneath her. "I don't owe anyone money, just my landlord." "Then your landlord owes someone, or gave your number to someone." Either way, you're in the middle of something you didn't ask for. So you just decided to take me. I decided not to let you die. The words were blunt, cold, and they hit her like a slap. She stared at him, searching his face for softness, for humanity, for anything that told her this wasn't real. But all she found was certainty. You're staying here, he continued, until I figure out what Victor wants and how deep this goes. You'll be safe. Your daughter will be safe. That's all that matters. I didn't ask for your protection. You asked for time. I'm giving it to you. She wanted to argue, wanted to scream, but exhaustion was a weight pressing down on her shoulders, and the truth was, she had nowhere else to go. So she nodded, just once. Dante's expression didn't change. He turned and started walking toward the stairs, then paused. Your room is on the second floor. Zara's is next to yours. Lucia will show you. And you? She asked before she could stop herself. He glanced back. I'll be close. And then he was gone, disappearing into the depths of the house like smoke. Amara stood there, alone in the vast entryway, and felt the weight of everything settling over her. She didn't know this man, didn't trust him, but he'd known her name, known where she lived, known how to find her in the dark. And somehow, that terrified her more than anything else. The days that followed were strange. She woke in a bed too soft, in a room too large, with sunlight streaming through curtains she hadn't closed. Zara adapted quickly, the way children do, running through the halls with Lucia, laughing in a way Amara hadn't heard in months. But Amara felt like a ghost. She moved through the house carefully, as if one wrong step might shatter the illusion of safety. She saw Dante only in passing, at breakfast, where he sat in silence with a newspaper and black coffee. In the hallway, where he moved with purpose and didn't look at her. In the garden at night, where he stood alone, smoke curling from a cigarette, his face unreadable. He never spoke to her unless necessary, never asked how she was, never explained what he was doing or why she was still there. And yet, she felt his presence everywhere, in the way the house was always warm, in the way Zara's laughter echoed without fear, in the way no one came for them, no one threatened them, no one even knew they existed. It should have been a relief, but it felt like a cage. One night, unable to sleep, Amara wandered downstairs. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that made you aware of your own heartbeat. She found herself in the library, a room she hadn't entered before, lined with books that looked more like relics than reading material. And there, sitting in a leather chair by the window, was Dante. He didn't look up when she entered, just kept staring out at the darkened grounds, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Can't sleep? He asked. She stopped in the doorway. No, neither can I. She didn't know what made her step forward. Curiosity, maybe, or the quiet loneliness that comes from being surrounded by safety but feeling entirely alone. Why are you doing this? She asked softly. He took a slow sip of his drink. Because I can. That's not an answer. It's the only one you'll get. She moved closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. No, he agreed. I don't. Then why? For the first time, he looked at her, really looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw something that made her breath catch. Weariness, the kind that came from carrying too much for too long. Because once, he said quietly, I didn't help someone who needed it, and I've been paying for it ever since. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and raw. Amara didn't ask who, didn't push. She just stood there, and for a moment, there were two people in the dark, sharing a silence that felt like understanding. If this story has already found a place in your heart, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below for more stories that stay long after they end. And then Dante turned back to the window, and the moment was gone. But something had shifted, something neither of them could take back. Time moved differently in the mansion. Days blurred into one another, each one the same and yet not. Amora woke to sunlight, fed Zara breakfast, watched her daughter run through the gardens with a kind of freedom Amora hadn't been able to give her in years, and every night she lay awake in that too-soft bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering when this strange, suspended life would end. Dante remained a constant, distant presence. He was there but never fully. She'd see him in the mornings, dressed in dark suits, speaking in low tones with men who came and went like shadows. She'd hear his voice through the walls, firm, commanding, the kind of voice that didn't ask, it ordered. But with her, he was different, quiet, careful, as if she was something fragile he didn't quite know how to hold. It unsettled her. She began to notice things, small things, the way his jaw tightened when Zara laughed too loudly, as if the sound reminded him of something he'd lost. The way he always stood with his back to walls, his eyes scanning rooms like he was always expecting a threat. The way he never touched her, not even by accident, as if proximity itself was dangerous. And she began to realize something she didn't want to admit. He was protecting her from more than just outside danger. He was protecting her from himself. One afternoon, Lucia asked Amora to join her in the kitchen. It was a warm space, filled with the smell of bread and herbs, and for a moment, Amora felt almost normal. "He's not what you think," Lucia said suddenly, her hands busy kneading dough. Amora blinked. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." Lucia didn't look up. "You watch him, and he watches you. I've been here 15 years. I know the signs." Amora's cheeks flushed. "I'm not." "You don't have to explain yourself to me, child. But you should know. Dante is a good man trapped in a bad life. He didn't choose this world. It chose him, and every day, it takes a piece of him he won't get back. Then why doesn't he leave?" Lucia finally looked at her, and her eyes were sad. "Because men like him don't get to leave. They only get to survive." The words stayed with Amora long after the conversation ended. That night, she found Dante in his study. She didn't knock, didn't announce herself, just pushed the door open and stepped inside. He was at his desk, papers spread before him, a pen in his hand. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face before it smoothed into neutrality. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I needed to talk to you." "About what?" "About why I'm still here." He set the pen down slowly. "You know why." "Do I?" "Because every time I ask, you give me half answers. You tell me I'm not safe. You tell me you're handling it. But you never tell me the truth." "The truth," he said evenly, "is complicated." "Then uncomplicate it." For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then he leaned back in his chair, and something in his posture shifted. He looked tired, more tired than she'd ever seen him. "Victor Harlan is dead," he said. Her breath caught. "What?" 2 days ago, someone put a bullet in his head and left him in an alley." She didn't know what to feel. Relief? Horror? Both tangled together until she couldn't separate them. Then I can go home." "No." "What do you mean, no? You said I was in danger because of him. If he's dead." "If he's dead, then whoever killed him is still out there. And they know about you." "How?" "Because he kept records. Names, numbers, addresses. And yours was in there." The room tilted. "Why?" "I don't know yet. But until I do, you're not leaving." She felt the walls closing in. "You can't keep me here." "I can, and I will." "This isn't protection, Dante. It's captivity." He stood, and the space between them felt too small. "You think I want this? You think I want you here, in my house, in my life, reminding me every single day that I'm the kind of man who keeps people against their will?" His voice was low, raw, and it hit her like a confession. "I didn't ask for this either," he continued. "But you're here, and as long as you're here, nothing will touch you. Not Victor, not whoever killed him, not anyone." And what if I don't want your protection? He stepped closer, and she saw the storm in his eyes. Then you'll die, and so will your daughter, and I'll have one more name to add to the list of people I couldn't save. The silence that followed was suffocating. Amora felt tears sting her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. I didn't ask you to Kay. I know, he said quietly, but I do. And then he turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, alone with the weight of words she hadn't expected to hear. If you've ever felt torn between fear and love, you'll understand her. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below. Your support keeps stories like this alive. That night, Amora didn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying his words over and over. I cared. 2 words that shouldn't have mattered. 2 words that changed everything. Because somewhere between the fear and the anger, between the captivity and the safety, something had begun to grow. Something she couldn't name. Something that terrified her more than any threat ever could. The next morning, Dante was gone. No explanation. No note. Just an absence that echoed through the house like a door left open in the wind. Lucia said he'd left before dawn, that he'd be back when he'd finished what needed finishing. But Amara felt the hollow ache of abandonment settle into her chest, even though she told herself it didn't matter. Even though she told herself she didn't care. But she did. And that realization sat heavy in her stomach like something swallowed whole. She spent the day trying to distract herself. She played with Zara, read her stories, helped Lucia prepare dinner. But her mind kept drifting back to the night before, to the look in Dante's eyes when he'd said he cared. She didn't understand him, didn't know if she wanted to, but she couldn't stop thinking about him. It was late afternoon when one of Dante's men appeared in the doorway of the kitchen. His name was Marco, tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. He'd been polite but distant since she'd arrived, always watching, always present. Amora, he said, come with me. Her heart jumped. Why? What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Just come. She followed him through the house, down a hallway she hadn't explored before, and into a room at the far end. Inside, there was a desk, a chair, and a laptop open to a video call. On the screen was Dante. He looked different, harder. His jaw was tight, and there was a cut on his cheekbone that hadn't been there before. Amara, he said, and his voice crackled through the speakers. She stepped closer, her pulse quickening. What happened to you? Nothing important. You're bleeding. I've had worse. She wanted to scream at him, wanted to demand answers, but instead, she just stood there, staring at his face on the screen, feeling something twist painfully in her chest. Why did you call me? She asked. Because I need you to know something. What? He hesitated, and she saw the struggle in his eyes. I found out why your name was in Victor's records. Her breath stopped. Tell me. Your landlord, Dante said slowly. He borrowed money from Victor, a lot of money, and when he couldn't pay it back, he gave Victor something else. Information, names of tenants, people who were vulnerable, people who could be used. The words hit her like stones. He gave him my name. Yes. Why? Because desperate people are easy to control. And Victor was building a network. People he could leverage. People he could threaten. You were going to be one of them. She felt sick. And now? Now Victor's dead. But his network isn't. There are others. And they are looking for loose ends. And I'm a loose end. Yes. She closed her eyes, trying to breathe through the panic rising in her throat. What do I do? You stay here. You trust me. And you let me handle this. I don't know if I can. You have to. She opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked at him, at the exhaustion carved into his features, at the determination in his gaze, at the man who'd taken her in when he didn't have to, who'd kept her safe when the world wanted to swallow her whole. Why are you doing this? She whispered. He didn't answer right away, just stared at her through the screen, and she saw something crack in his expression, something vulnerable and raw. Because once, he said quietly, I let someone down, someone who needed me, and I swore I'd never do it again. Who? It doesn't matter. It does. He looked away, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. My sister. Her name was Elena. She was 17, and she trusted the wrong person. I was too late. The pain in his words was palpable, and Amara felt her heart break for him, for the guilt he carried, for the weight of a loss he'd never let go. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be. Just stay safe. And then the screen went dark. Amara stood there for a long time, staring at the empty monitor, feeling the pieces of him rearrange in her mind. He wasn't just a man who dealt in violence and power. He was a man haunted by the people he couldn't save. And she was one more name on that list. But she didn't want to be. She wanted to be something else. Something more. The days passed slowly after that. Dante returned 3 days later, quieter than before. The cut on his face had healed into a thin line, but the heaviness in his eyes remained. He didn't speak to her at first, just moved through the house like a ghost, locked in whatever war he was fighting. But one evening, as the sun set and the house grew dim, Amara found him in the garden. He was standing by the fountain, his back to her, his shoulders tense. She approached slowly, unsure of what to say, but when she reached him, the words came anyway. Thank you, she said. He didn't turn. For what? For telling me the truth. For caring enough to keep me safe. He was silent for a long moment. Then, finally, he looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen before. Softness. You shouldn't thank me, he said. I'm the reason you trapped here. Maybe, she said, but you're also the reason I'm still alive. He stared at her, and for a heartbeat, the distance between them felt like nothing at all. Then he turned away, and the moment was gone. But the feeling lingered, and Amara knew, with a certainty that terrified her, that she was no longer afraid of him. She was afraid of how much she wanted to stay. Something had shifted between them. Amara felt it in the way Dante looked at her now, longer, quieter, as if he was trying to solve a puzzle he didn't have all the pieces to. She felt it in the way he lingered in doorways when she passed, the way his voice softened when he spoke her name, the way the air seemed to tighten whenever they were in the same room. She told herself it didn't mean anything, that it was just proximity, just the strange intimacy of two people trapped in the same cage. But she knew better, and so did he. It was a Tuesday when everything changed. Amara was in the library, curled up in the chair by the window with a book she wasn't really reading. Zara was asleep upstairs, and the house was quiet in the way it only was late at night. She heard footsteps behind her, slow and deliberate, and she didn't need to turn to know it was him. Can't sleep again. Dante's voice was low, familiar now in a way that made her chest tighten. No, she said. You never do. He moved into the room, and she felt the shift in the air, the way it always changed when he was near. He didn't sit, just stood by the window, looking out at the dark grounds, his hands in his pockets. You've been avoiding me, she said before she could stop herself. I know. Why? He didn't answer right away, just kept staring out the window, his jaw tight. Because, he finally said, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Making what harder? This. He gestured vaguely between them. You being here. Me keeping you safe. All of it. She set the book down and stood, moving closer. I didn't ask to complicate your life, Dante. I know, but you did anyway. The word stung, but there was no anger in his voice. Just exhaustion. Just truth. Then let me go, she said quietly. He turned to her then, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. I can't. Why not? Because the moment you leave this house, you're dead, and I'm not letting that happen. even if I want to leave. Even then. She should have been angry, should have fought. But instead, she just looked at him, at the lines of tension carved into his face, at the weight he carried like armor. You can't protect everyone, Dante, she said softly. I know. Then why are you trying so hard to protect me? He stepped closer, and the space between them became almost nothing. Because you're not everyone. Her heart hammered in her chest. What am I, then? He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the war in his eyes. The battle between what he wanted and what he couldn't allow himself to have. You're the person I can't stop thinking about, he said, his voice rough. And that's the problem. The words hung between them, heavy and undeniable. Amara felt her pulse in her throat, felt the heat of him so close she could have reached out and touched him. And God help her, she wanted to. Maybe, she whispered. It doesn't have to be a problem. Something flickered in his eyes. Hunger, need, fear. And then he stepped back, breaking the moment like glass. It does, he said, because I'm not the kind of man you should want, and you're not the kind of woman I should touch. Why not? Because I'll ruin you. You already have. The confession slipped out before she could stop it, raw and honest and true. His eyes darkened. Amora. I'm not afraid of you, Dante. I was, but I'm not anymore. You should be. But I'm not. He stared at her, and she saw the cracks in his armor widening, saw the man beneath the monster, saw the loneliness he wore like a second skin. If your heart's racing too, take a breath, and don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below for more unforgettable love stories. Don't do this, he said quietly. Don't make me want something I can't have. What if I wanted to? He closed his eyes, and she saw the pain in his expression. Then we're both fools. And before she could respond, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there with her heart in pieces. But the truth had been spoken, and they both knew there was no taking it back. The next day, Dante didn't leave his study. Amara saw him only once, through the crack in the door, sitting at his desk with his head in his hands. She wanted to go to him, wanted to tell him that whatever was between them didn't have to be wrong. But she didn't, because maybe he was right. Maybe they were both fools. That night, she lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, replaying his words over and over. Asterisk, you're the person I can't stop thinking about. Asterisk. It should have scared her, should have sent her running. But instead, it made her feel alive. For the first time in years, she felt like she mattered. Not as a mother, not as a burden, not as a problem to be solved. Just as herself. And that, she realized, was what made this so dangerous. Because she wasn't falling for the man who'd taken her. She was falling for the man who'd saved her. And there was no coming back from that. The storm came 3 days later. Not rain, not wind, but something worse. Men, strangers, arriving at the gates with guns and demands. Amora heard the commotion first, shouts from outside, engines roaring, the sharp crack of something shattering. She was in Zara's room, reading her a story, when Lucia burst through the door. Come with me, Lucia said, her voice tight. Now. What's happening? No time. Move. Amara scooped Zara into her arms and followed Lucia down the hall, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. They descended into a part of the house she'd never seen before, a basement, narrow and dim, with concrete walls and a single light bulb swaying from the ceiling. Stay here, Lucia said. Don't come out until Dante or I come for you. Lucia. Stay here. And then she was gone, the door slamming shut, the lock clicking into place. Amara held Zara tight, her daughter's face buried in her shoulder. It's okay, baby. It's okay. But it wasn't. She could hear it through the walls. Shouting. Gunfire. The sound of violence tearing through the house she'd come to think of as safe. And then, silence. A silence so complete it felt like the world had stopped breathing. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time lost meaning in the dark. And then the door opened. Dante stood there, blood on his shirt, his face hard and unreadable. But when he saw her, something in his expression softened. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head, unable to speak. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning her, then Zara, as if confirming they were real. "It's over. They are gone." "Who were they?" "Victor's people. What's left of them." He crouched down in front of her, and for the first time, she saw the exhaustion in his eyes. "They wanted you, and they are not going to stop." "Then what do we do?" He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the decision forming behind his eyes. "We end this. Tonight." "How?" "I'm going to give them what they want." Her blood turned to ice. "You can't." "Not you," he said quickly. "Me. I'm going to draw them out. Finish it. And if you don't come back." His jaw tightened. "Marco will get you somewhere safe. Somewhere far from here. You and Zara. A new life." "I don't want a new life. I want—" She stopped, the words catching in her throat. "What?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She looked at him, at the man who'd become something she never expected, and said the thing she'd been too afraid to admit. "I want you to come back." Something broke in his expression. Pain, longing, fear. He reached out, his hand cupping her face with a gentleness that shattered her. "Amora." "Don't," she whispered. "Don't say goodbye. Not yet." He leaned forward, and for one impossible moment, his forehead rested against hers. She felt his breath, felt the tremor in his hand, felt the weight of everything unsaid between them. "I'll come back," he said. "I promise." "Don't make promises you can't keep." "Then I'll make this one." He pulled back, his eyes locked on hers. "I'm coming back to you." And then he was gone. The hours that followed were the longest of Amora's life. She sat in that basement with Zara sleeping in her arms, listening to the silence above, wondering if every creak was the sound of him returning or the sound of strangers coming to finish what they'd started. Lucia came down once, bringing food and water, her face pale and drawn. "He'll be okay," Lucia said, though her voice wavered. "He always is." But Amora saw the fear in her eyes, saw the doubt, and it made her own fear grow until it filled every corner of her chest. She prayed to a God she wasn't sure she believed in, prayed that Dante would come back, prayed that she'd get the chance to tell him all the things she'd been too afraid to say. And when the door finally opened again, and she saw him standing there, alive, breathing, whole, she felt something inside her break open. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. She just ran to him. He caught her, his arms wrapping around her with a fierceness that stole her breath. She felt him bury his face in her hair, felt the tremor that ran through him, felt the way he held her like she was the only thing keeping him together. "You came back," she whispered. "I told you I would." She pulled back just enough to look at him, her hands on his face, her eyes searching his. "Is it over?" "It's over. All of it. All of it." She felt tears spill down her cheeks, relief and something deeper flooding through her. "I thought I'd lost you." "You didn't." "But I could have." He wiped her tears with his thumbs, his touch so gentle it made her ache. "But you didn't." And then, before she could stop herself, before she could think about all the reasons it was a mistake, she kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, a question more than an answer. But then his arms tightened around her, and he kissed her back with a desperation that told her everything she needed to know. That he'd been holding back, that he'd been afraid, that he wanted this as much as she did. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers again. "This is a bad idea," he murmured. "I know. I'm not good for you. I don't care. You should. But I don't." He pulled back, his eyes searching hers. Amora, if you stay. I'm staying. You don't know what you're saying. Yes, I do. She took his face in her hands, making him look at her. I'm staying. Not because I'm afraid. Not because I have nowhere else to go. But because I choose to. I choose you. She saw the war in his eyes. Saw the part of him that wanted to push her away, to protect her from himself. But she also saw the part that wanted to hold on. The part that was tired of being alone. Before we close this chapter, take a moment, like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below. Every small gesture helps the next story find its way to you. Say something, she whispered. He looked at her for a long moment. And then, finally, he said the words she'd been waiting to hear. I choose you too. And in that moment, in the aftermath of violence and fear, something new was born. Not safety, not certainty, but something far more dangerous. Love. In the days that followed, the house became something different. Not a cage, not a fortress, a home. Amara felt it in the way mornings unfolded, slowly, quietly, with Dante drinking coffee at the kitchen table while Zara showed him drawings she'd made. She felt it in the way he looked at her now, without the walls, without the distance. She felt it in the way he touched her, a hand on her back as he passed, fingers brushing hers when they reached for the same thing, a kiss pressed to her temple when he thought she wasn't paying attention. It was terrifying and beautiful and nothing like she'd expected. Because Dante, for all his darkness, was gentle with her. He was careful, deliberate, as if she was something precious he was afraid to break. And maybe she was, but she was learning that broken things could still be whole. One evening, after Zara had gone to bed, Amara found Dante on the terrace. The city lights spread out below them like fallen stars. She moved beside him, and he wrapped an arm around her without a word, pulling her close. What are you thinking about? She asked. How different my life is now. Good different or bad different? He looked down at her, and she saw the smallest smile touch his lips. Good. Terrifyingly good. Terrifying. Because I didn't think I could have this. I didn't think I deserved it. She turned to face him fully. You do. You don't know the things I've done. I don't need to. I know who you are now. And that's enough. He cupped her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. How did you end up here? In my life, in my house, in my... He stopped, the word catching. In your what? She prompted softly. In my heart. Her breath hitched. It was the first time he'd said it, the first time he'd let himself be that vulnerable. And it broke her open in the best way. You've been in mine for a while now, she whispered. He kissed her then, slow and deep, and she felt the promise in it, the commitment, the choice to stay, even when leaving would be easier. When they finally pulled apart, he kept his arms around her, and they stood there in the quiet, two people who'd found each other in the dark. I need to tell you something, he said after a while. Okay. The people who came for you. Victor's network. It's bigger than I thought. Her heart sank. What does that mean? It means we can't stay here forever. I have enemies, Amora. People who would use you and Zara to get to me. So what do? We leave. Start over somewhere else. Somewhere quiet. And your work. I'm done with it. All of it. He looked at her, and she saw the determination in his eyes. I've spent my entire life in this world. And I'm tired. I want something different. Something real. With me. With you. With Zara. If you'll have me. Taze pricked her eyes. You know I will. He pulled her close again, and she felt the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her cheek. We'll leave next week, he said. Lucia will come with us if she wants. Marco will handle things here. Where will we go? I don't know yet. Somewhere you can breathe. Somewhere Zara can grow up without fear. Somewhere we can just be. Yes. She smiled against his chest. That sounds perfect. And for the first time in a long time, she believed it. The following days were a blur of preparation. Dante worked quietly, tying up loose ends, transferring accounts, ensuring that when they left, there would be nothing to follow them. Amora packed their belongings, which weren't many, and tried to imagine what this new life would look like. A small house somewhere, maybe by the sea. Zara playing in the yard. Dante teaching her to ride a bike. Lazy mornings and quiet nights. A life without fear. It felt like a dream. But when she looked at Dante, when she saw the peace settling into his features, she knew it was real. One night, as they lay in bed together, his arm draped over her waist, she asked the question that had been nagging at her. "Do you think we'll be happy?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think happiness is something you build, not something you find. And I'm willing to build it with you. Even if it's hard. Especially if it's hard." She turned to face him, and in the dim light, she saw everything she needed to see. Love, commitment, hope. "I love you," she said, the words slipping out easily now. His eyes softened. "I love you too." It was the first time either of them had said it out loud, and it felt like coming home. The night before they were set to leave, there was a knock at the door. Dante stiffened immediately, his body going into protective mode. "Stay here," he said, but Amara followed him anyway, her heart pounding. When he opened the door, there was a woman standing there, young, maybe mid-20s, with dark hair and familiar eyes. Dante froze. "Hello, brother," the woman said. Amora's breath caught. "Elena." Dante stared at the woman, and for the first time since Amora had known him, she saw him completely undone. "You're dead," he whispered. "I was supposed to be," Elena said, "but I survived, and I've been looking for you ever since." The world tilted. Amora watched as Dante stepped forward, his hand shaking, and pulled his sister into his arms. She saw the tears streaming down his face, saw the way he held her like she might disappear. And she understood. He'd been carrying the weight of her death for years. And now, impossibly, she was alive. Elena pulled back, smiling through her own tears. "I'm sorry it took so long, but I'm here now." Dante couldn't speak, could only stare at her, as if trying to convince himself she was real. "Who's this?" Elena asked, looking at Amora. Dante turned, and the look in his eyes was one Amora would never forget. "This," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "is Amora, the woman I'm going to spend the rest of my life with." Elena smiled. "Then I guess I got here just in time." And as the three of them stood in the doorway, with the past and the future colliding, Amora felt something settle in her chest. Hope. Real, tangible hope. Elena's return changed everything. Not in the way Amora expected. Not with chaos or upheaval, but with something quieter. Something healing. Dante, who had carried the weight of his sister's death like a stone in his chest, finally began to breathe. Amora saw it in the way his shoulders relaxed, in the way laughter came easier, in the way he held Zara a little tighter, as if grateful for every small moment of joy. Elena stayed with them those final days before they were meant to leave. She was kind, thoughtful, and surprisingly gentle with Zara, who took to her immediately. And as Amara watched Dante and his sister sit together on the terrace, talking in low voices about the years they'd lost, she felt her own heart expand. Because this was what love did. It made space. It made room. It welcomed in the broken pieces and helped them become whole. One afternoon, while Dante was meeting with Marco for the last time, Elena found Amora in the garden. "Can I talk to you?" Elena asked. "Of course." They sat on the stone bench beneath the oak tree, the sunlight filtering through the leaves like lace. "I wanted to thank you," Elena said. "For what?" "For saving him." Amora frowned. "I didn't." "You did." Elena looked at her, and there was a softness in her eyes. "When I knew Dante before, he was different. Lighter. But after I was taken, after he thought I was dead, he became someone else. someone colder, someone who didn't believe he deserved anything good. Amora felt her throat tighten. But when I saw him yesterday, Elena continued, I saw my brother again, the man he used to be, and that's because of you. He saved me first, Amora said quietly. Maybe you saved each other. The word settled between them, soft and true. I don't know what happens next, Amora admitted. We're leaving, starting over, but I'm terrified it won't work, that the world will find us anyway. Elena reached over and took her hand. It might, but you'll face it together, and that's what matters. Amora squeezed her hand, grateful for the understanding. Are you coming with us? She asked. Elena smiled. No, I have my own life to rebuild, but I'll visit, and I'll always be here if you need me. He needs you. I know, but he needs you more. That evening, the four of them, Dante, Amora, Zara, and Elena, sat together for dinner. It was simple, pasta and wine and laughter, the kind of meal that felt like family. And as Amora looked around the table, at the man she loved and the daughter she cherished and the sister who had returned from the dead, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Later, after Zara had fallen asleep and Elena had retired to her room, Dante pulled Amora onto the terrace. I have something for you, he said. What is it? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. When he opened it, Amora saw a ring. Simple, silver, beautiful. Her breath caught. I know we haven't known each other long, Dante said, his voice steady but his eyes vulnerable. And I know this life hasn't been easy. But I also know that I don't want to spend another day without you. Not as a protector, not as someone you're stuck with, but as your partner, your equal, your choice. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Dante. Marry me, Amora. Not because you have to, but because you want to. She looked at him, at the man who had once been a stranger and was now everything, and she knew her answer. Yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he kissed her, slow and deep, and she felt the world fall away. I love you, he whispered against her lips. I love you too. And in that moment, beneath the stars, they made a promise to each other, not just to stay, but to build something beautiful. The next morning, they left. The house, the fortress that had kept them safe, was left behind, along with the life Dante had known. Marco promised to handle everything, and Lucia, true to her word, came with them. They drove for hours, through cities and towns and open roads, until they reached a small coastal village where no one knew their names and no one asked questions. The house Dante had arranged was modest but warm. White walls, blue shutters, a garden that overlooked the sea. It was perfect. That first night, as they unpacked boxes and settled into their new life, Amora stood at the window and watched the waves crash against the shore. Dante came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Do you think we'll be okay? She asked. I think we'll be more than okay. How can you be sure? Because we have each other, and that's all we need. She leaned back against him, and they stood there in the quiet, two people who had found love in the most unlikely place. And for the first time in a long time, Amora believed in tomorrow. The months that followed were the best of Amora's life. Not because they were easy. They weren't. There were still hard days, still moments when Dante would wake in the middle of the night, haunted by ghosts he couldn't name. Still times when Amora would look over her shoulder, waiting for the past to catch up. But they faced it together, and that made all the difference. Zara thrived in the coastal town. She made friends, started school, and spent her afternoons collecting shells on the beach. She called Dante Papa now, and every time she did, Amora saw his eyes soften in a way that made her heart ache with love. Lucia became the grandmother Zara had never had, baking cookies and telling stories and filling the house with warmth. And Dante became the man he was always meant to be. He worked with his hands now, building things, fixing things. He taught Zara how to fish, how to tie knots, how to be brave. And at night, He held Amora close and whispered promises into her hair. They were married in the spring, in a small ceremony on the beach with only Lucia, Zara, and Elena in attendance. No grand celebration, no extravagance, just love and commitment and the sound of the waves bearing witness. And when Dante slipped the second ring onto her finger, when he said, "I do," with tears in his eyes, Amara felt the last of her fears fall away. Because this was real. This was theirs. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Zara asleep in Dante's arms, Amara said the thing that had been on her mind for weeks. "I'm pregnant." Dante went very still. Then, slowly, he turned to look at her. "What?" "I'm pregnant. About 2 months." For a moment, he didn't say anything, just stared at her with an expression she couldn't read. And then he smiled. Not a small smile. A full, radiant, soul-deep smile that made him look younger than she'd ever seen him. "We're having a baby?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes." He set Zara down gently, then pulled Amara into his arms, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "I love you," he whispered. "God, I love you. I love you too." And as they stood there, wrapped in each other, Amara felt the fullness of the life they'd built. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. The months passed in a blur of joy and anticipation. Dante painted the nursery himself, pale yellow with white clouds. Zara picked out stuffed animals and insisted on reading to Amora's belly every night. And Amora, round and glowing, felt more content than she ever thought possible. Elena visited twice, each time bringing gifts and laughter and stories of the life she was rebuilding. And each time, Dante held her a little tighter, as if still amazed that she was real. When the baby came, a boy, perfect and small and screaming with life, Dante wept. He held his son with shaking hands, staring down at the tiny face with an expression of pure wonder. "What should we name him?" Amora asked, exhausted but happy. Dante looked at her, then back at the baby. "Luca. It means light." "Luca," she repeated, and it felt right. "Because he's the light that came after the dark," Dante said softly. And Amora, tired and sore and overwhelmingly full of love, could only nod. Time moved differently after that. Not slower or faster, but richer, deeper. Amora watched her family grow and change. Watched Zara become a fierce and loving big sister. Watched Dante transform from a man haunted by his past into a father who sang lullabies and changed diapers and built sandcastles with his children. And she realized something profound. That love wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone willing to grow with you. One night, years later, when Zara was a teenager and Luca was learning to read, Dante found Amara in the garden. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Regret what?" "Texting the wrong number." She turned to him, and in the moonlight, she saw the man who had saved her, the man she had saved in return. "No," she said, "not for a second." He pulled her close, and they swayed together in the quiet, two people who had found home in each other. "I was so lost before you," he murmured. "So was I. And now." "Now," she said, looking up at him, "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." He kissed her then, soft and slow, and she tasted the promise of forever in it. Because this was their story. Not perfect, not easy, but real. And that, Amora knew, was the greatest gift of all. Years became a lifetime. Amora grew older in that house by the sea. Her hair silvered at the temples. Laugh lines deepened around her eyes. Her hands, once soft, grew strong from the life she'd built. And Dante aged beside her. Slower, quieter, but no less present. The darkness that had once lived in his eyes faded with each passing year, replaced by something gentler, something earned. Zara grew into a woman who carried her mother's strength and her father's determination. She went to university, fell in love, brought that love home to meet the family. And when she stood on the same beach where her parents had married and said her own vows, Amora wept with joy. Luca became a teacher, patient and kind, with his father's protective nature and his mother's soft heart. He built a life in a nearby town, close enough to visit every Sunday, and each time he walked through the door, Dante's face lit up like sunrise. Elena visited less as the years passed, building her own family, her own peace. But she never forgot, and every Christmas, she returned to the house by the sea, and the siblings would sit together and remember the people they used to be. Lucia passed quietly one autumn morning, in her sleep, with a smile on her face. They buried her in the garden beneath the oak tree, and Dante cried for the woman who had been more mother to him than his own. And through it all, Amora and Dante remained. Partners, lovers, best friends. They had their fights, their disagreements, their moments of frustration. But they always came back to each other, always chose each other, always remembered that they had been given something rare, a second chance. On their 30th anniversary, they sat on the porch as the sun set over the ocean. The house was quiet, the children grown and gone. Just the two of them and the sound of the waves. "Do you remember," Dante said, "the night you texted me by mistake?" Amora smiled. "How could I forget? I was so angry when I got that message. Thought it was some kind of trap. And then I saw you, scared and brave and trying so hard to protect your daughter, and I knew I couldn't walk away. Why didn't you?" He looked at her, and even after all these years, the love in his eyes made her heart skip. "Because somewhere deep down, I think I knew that you were going to change everything." "Did I? You gave me a life I never thought I deserved. A family, a home, a reason to be better than I was." She reached over and took his hand, their fingers intertwining like they had 1,000 times before. "You gave me the same." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. "Dante," she said softly. "Yes." "If you could go back, would you change anything?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he shook his head. "No, not a single moment. Because every moment, good and bad, led me to you. And that's enough." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and he kissed the top of her head, and they stayed like that until the stars came out. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too. Always." And as the night grew deeper and the world grew quiet, Amara thought about the girl she used to be, the one who had sent a text to the wrong number out of desperation, the one who had been so afraid, so alone, so certain that life would never get better. She wished she could tell that girl something. That mistakes sometimes become miracles. That love finds you in the strangest places. That the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures. But mostly, she wished she could tell her this. That it's okay to be afraid. Okay to be broken. Okay to need someone. Because sometimes, the person who saves you is the one you never saw coming. And sometimes, the life you never planned becomes the one you were always meant to live. If stories like this linger in your heart long after they end, don't leave just yet. Like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below, and let the next story find you when the night grows quiet again. Amara closed her eyes and listened to the rhythm of Dante's breathing, to the sound of the waves, to the life they had built together out of nothing but choice and courage and love. And she knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that she would do it all again. Every moment of fear, every moment of doubt, every moment of pain, because they had led her here, to this porch, this man, this life, to love. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The story of how a wrong number became a right choice, how a mistake became a miracle, how two broken people found each other in the dark and built something beautiful in the light. This was their story, and it would live forever in the hearts of those who heard it, not as a warning, but as a promise that love, in all its strange and unexpected forms, is always worth fighting for. Always.